Welcome to today's webinar on building an identity and access management roadmap. This is part one, picking the right solution and technology. I'm Katie Paspian with Pathmaker Group and will be the moderator today. We will begin shortly. The next session in our series on building an identity and access management roadmap will be on June 17th. We will cover the importance of planning before you build. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're pleased to offer a presentation focused on 5 key things to consider when it comes to picking the solution that best meets your needs. It's not always what's most popular or what the analysts recommend. It's not about force-fitting an on-premise or cloud or hybrid solution across all areas of identity and access management. Vanita Bashan is the President and Enterprise Architect at Ponus Research. Keith Squires is the President and CEO at Pathmaker Group. At this point, we will allow the panelists to begin the discussion.
Well, thank you, Katie, and thank you everyone who's joining today. I've looked at the list of participants. I see a lot of names that have been with us before, so welcome back. For those of you who are new, welcome first-timers. We've been doing a series of these webinars really ever since COVID started, so we had to move from face-to-face events to remote, so I'm glad to have you. Right now, as you know, if you're in the cybersecurity industry, specifically identity access, we're in the news. You've seen the news obviously lately about the pipeline shutdown through ransomware, all the other events that are going on. It makes protecting our identities for our organizations all the more important, and I'm sure you guys are acutely aware. If you're working on planning activities that require you guys to improve, progress, get more mature with identity access, you're not alone. 2020 saw a 33% spike in cybersecurity spending overall in the industry. Well, that's phenomenal spending amount. 2021 is still supposed to grow another 10%. So you're in good company if you're looking at these processes and plans and trying to figure it out, because there's a lot of companies right now that are trying to gain momentum and improve and really do a better job of protecting our organizations. It's a very important job that you're involved in. So with that, let's just talk a little bit about what we talked about in our prior session. If you didn't get to join us, please feel free to go back and review that. It was really some important details and some suggestions, processes around building your roadmap. How are you going to get from where you're at today to where you need to be? How do you know you're going to do it the right way or a good way that's effective? So, Kate, if you'll just forward a little bit here on this, just a quick review for you guys that didn't join. Why do we need to build a roadmap? There's some key things that are important about looking at identity and access management with a long-term view and not just as tactical projects. The key thing is strategic improvements. So what we see with our clients so often is there is so much firefighting going on, and the urgent, immediate things take priority, and you never can carve out room to do long-term improvements. So when you build a roadmap, you lay a foundation for here's the things we're going to do that are important and strategic and may take a while, but let's get everybody on board, especially our stakeholders, make sure they're aligned in this process. Standardizing identity and access across the enterprise is hard to do, but it's an important thing to do to really get traction. Go ahead and move forward. So some of the ideas about why, and then, a little summary here about the steps. This is one approach. It's not the only approach, but you do need to make sure that you've prepared, that you're going through an assessment to measure where you're at, where your gaps are. Go through the analysis of figuring out what's really wrong and where do we need to improve. And then finally, put that all in a plan, wrap it in a long-term view. And, here's just an idea of some preliminary chunks of work that most people would need to carve out and define for their improvements. This came out of an assessment that we did for a company. And obviously, there's a lot here. It may take longer than 2 years. It may take 3 or 4, but whatever it's going to require, you need to get it laid out and planned. And the key thing here is once you get this part in place, you got to get down to key objectives, some of the detailed requirements, maybe get into some use cases, Make sure you know exactly what you're going to have to support with these solutions, which kind of takes us in to the next step. And I'll just toss it to Vanita if you want to talk a little bit about some of these options that so many companies are dealing with. Once they get past that roadmap and start looking at solutions, that's really what the topic is about today. So how do you figure that out, Vanita?
So thank you, Keith, and welcome everyone. Um, Keith brought up a really good point. You've planned, you thought about what you needed, you've prioritized. Now what, right? And the biggest issue is you have to sort of sit down and look at options. And why are these options really important? It's because from a IAM perspective, we've turned the whole security model on its head. In the old days, we had the traditional models. We had network security. We had perimeter security. We knew where things were, and we could control access to them. Today, with remote working, with consumers out there, identity is your new perimeter, if you will. So when that happens, you've not only got to allow for your, you want to protect your resources, but you've also got to let people bring their security with them. You've got to authenticate them. And then if you think something is different, you've got to give them another factor so that you can really try and prove who they are. So there's almost like a whole change. There's an identity security model, right? It's the model based on identity. So now where do you go with this? Do you look at the traditional, shall I get a piece of software, put it in my environment, and take 2 years to bring a product that really works out there, and I keep trying to refine it and support it, etc. So that's the big question. Do I go on premise? Do I go hosted? Do I get someone else to put this solution for me in the cloud? Do I look at a combination, a hybrid solution where I have some of it in the cloud, some of it on-prem, and I manage my legacy applications through that? You've got to look at that option. Do you want to just say, I'm not dealing with this, I'm going with somebody out there in the cloud that's going to give me identity and access management as a service? That's an option. Or do you say, you know what? I'm going to have an on-prem solution or a hosted solution, and I'm going to just handle the managing of it. I'm going to give to another company, a managed service provider. So you've got to look at all these various options as you get into this modernized IAM environment. Katie, next slide, please. And so here's where I think we need to think about, just at a high level, what are the, when you compare an identity as a software and as a service solution, and you compare an on-premise solution, what are some of the pros and cons? And I know, Keith, you had an opinion on this, so off you go.
Every client that we deal with is wrestling with this right now because there are some changes in the industry. Obviously, we've been at it a long time, but the last 5 years for sure, we've seen a big shift. More and more companies are beginning to trust providers to house and store their identity. The gold, basically the gold from their organization in a cloud environment. It's very important that that's secured. And so there is trust in the industry now with a lot of these solutions where, hey, I'm okay if someone else is safeguarding that, if it provides me the kind of benefit I really need to help our organization. So if we just look at these two lanes, and this is not the only two options, but these two are, sort of the main lanes. The left is a identity as a service option, which, if you think about it, let's define that. That means a multi-tenant SaaS provider. So their solution, is good for many companies, and not just a unique solution for you sitting in the cloud that you can change the way you want it for you. It's a product that's going to support many different organizations. So as a result, you get the scalability and you get some of the benefits of that type of solution. Obviously, you're not dealing with overhead infrastructure anymore. That's on the vendor. The products are built so that they're not as heavy a lift to get them implemented and installed. Again, that's on the vendor. The stuff out of the box should support most of your needs and capabilities. which simplifies your need to, manage and monitor and deal with all the complexities of infrastructure. You're basically kicking that over to the vendor. You're saying, hey, I don't really want to deal with this. I can't find the people. They're too expensive. It's too hard, too complex. I want a solution that's going to do all that for me. And that's where you'd lean on IDaaS. On the counter to that, you may have some requirements in your organization, especially with legacy apps or custom apps, where using a solution like that is not necessarily going to satisfy all your needs. So you do have to dig in and look at that a little bit before you pull the trigger on that type of technology. And then, you're talking about operational expense now versus capital purchase. So over time, that's going to begin to add up. So you just need to make sure you look at it, study it, compare it, etc.
I have one thing to add there, really. The other thing to remember is most IDaaS providers and most IDaaS solutions, they are using a templated approach, right? So they're going at this as here are best fit templates.
Mm-hmm.
And you will have to sort of sometimes shoehorn some of your requirements into that best fit template. And for some organizations, that just doesn't work. So that is something to think about. There are constraints and limitations that are put in place. They call them guardrails, but whichever way you look at it. An IDaaS solution does have some constraints and limitations that may or may not work for you. So something to think about.
Right. We'll get into how you can really vet that out here in a few minutes. So let's look at on-prem. What companies have traditionally done with these more complex, large IAM stacks. You make a capital purchase, and over time, your cost is reduced. Now that's starting to change. We're seeing a shift in licensing approach with a lot of these vendors. They're doing more term licenses now with multi-year agreements. So you got to watch that as well. So it's starting to feel a little bit more like a IDaaS pricing model. So just be aware that is starting to shift a little bit. The benefit is you keep everything in-house, right? If it's yours and it's on-prem, then you deal with the security, you deal with the infrastructure, you control everything. It gives you more flexibility with the way these products usually can be configured. You have much more flexibility and control. Some of them you can totally change the way the products work if you want to go there. And a lot of companies like to do that. So you just have to decide what's best for your company. You do have to have the skills, right? So if you can't find the people, you can't train the people, you don't have the mentality in-house of being a kind of build your own, it's going to be challenging. You can find a vendor, a provider, like companies like ours who will take that on for you. So you can still have the benefit of on-prem, but not necessarily require your in-house staff to do a lot of heavy lifting. We take that on a lot. But all those things that you normally do with on-prem products, you have to deal with. So there's no getting away from that when you choose that option if you need the flexibility. The bottom line is, you just got to decide, can we go with more, like Vanita said, more of a best practice kind of pre-configured, stay within the lanes approach, or do we need the flexibility because we've got the kind of apps that require it, or we just want better control or other reasons, which we'll get into in a minute here.
So one other thing I wanted to say about on-premise, right? I want to be an equal opportunity comms provider. The thing to remember is when you talk of skills, most people underestimate the number of people you need for a support team for an on-prem solution, because they sort of lump everything, the enhancement of that solution to support newer versions, patches, fixes, etc. They think it's the same team that is also responding to the level 3, the problems when they occur. And usually what that means is either your enhancement of the solution suffers or your support suffers. So it's a big problem, and it's one that I know we plan to address in a future session in this series, because to me it's so critical. If you haven't planned your support and development teams accurately, your on-premise solution, no matter how good that technology is, it's going to have problems. So that's another thing. Planning and making sure you have the right number of people with the right number of skills.
Yep.
So, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, but you've got to look at what works for you.
Yep. Okay, let's shift to the next topic here. Vanita, I'm going to kick this one over to you. And well, actually, let's start with that first topic. So, is your company going cloud first? And we've had clients come to us and say, you know what, we've had this mandate come up, and everything we possibly can is going to the cloud. That's just our direction as a organization for our technology. So, whatever we can do, we're going to move. And so, let's start looking and figuring out how to get that done. And we've had companies that have taken that approach. So, if that's you, the good news is there's options. The bad news is they might not fit you perfectly, but there are options now.
Again, what's important? Should you decide to go the route of cloud first, and you decide, okay, I'm going to move whatever IAM solutions I have into the cloud. Important point to remember. Do you have your processes and policies defined? Are they currently automated? And I'll walk you through a client we had, and I'll tell you some of the gotchas and some of the things that worked for them. If you don't have your processes and policies well defined, and you decide to go with an IDaaS solution, please remember, as you tweak your policies and you decide this doesn't quite work or that needs change, there is a time. It's not within your control to say, okay, I want this changed now. So it's very important before you just make some of these decisions that you understand your own environment, what works, what doesn't, what's automated, and what you've already thought about. That's really, really critical before you make that decision.
And that, just a comment, between sort of finishing your big chunks of roadmap and deciding to go down the road of different solutions, there's some mini projects that can occur in between there, like diving into your use cases and your processes and looking at, step by step, how do we achieve this? And is it working? Does it need to be changed and shifted? Once you kind of get exposure to that, you'll have a much better, you'll have the ammunition you need to go into technology selection.
And I call that the technology agnostic reference architecture. You've got to have that. What are the capabilities? What are the services? Now you go pick a technology. That makes a big difference as opposed to I'll pick a technology because everyone says pick it, and now I'm going to try and shoehorn my requirements into that technology.
Right. So then we've got this topic of legacy apps, right? There are some companies, everything they're using is off the shelf now, or they're trying to go there. There are other companies, depending on the industry, where there are very tightly wound apps that are specific to your industry that you're not going to move away from. And there's plenty of those. And so how do you integrate those things? Are there good integration options? Do they give you openings into user lifecycle management, the security model, roles and entitlements and things like that, or not? Because if it's not available in more of a standardized way, integrating those things with some of these IDaaS-based products will be a challenge. And so you really got to examine how long you're going to be on those applications. Can you ever migrate off of them, or are you kind of stuck there and you have to support that?
And then I want to take something that I was just thinking about also, which I see is the regulated industry, right? So we have regulations. And some of these, like if you're a financial organization, if you're a utility company, these regulations have been around for a while. Granted, they could do with some modernization, just hasn't happened yet. So you have to think, if you are part of a regulated industry, what are you going to do to actually make your solutions work, not just from your perspective, but also from an audit perspective? So it's really important for all of these things to think about them, to make sure it works for you, and then pick the technology.
Yep. The last topic to think about is just how can you support these solutions? Sometimes it's really difficult to find the resources you need to move this forward in your organization, and companies are struggling with it all the time right now. The cyber industry is shorthanded, and has been for a while and will be for a while. So, do you have a good base to build on? Do you have the people you need? Can you get the people you need? If you can't, you really need to factor that into your equation. You either need to find reliable providers, or you need to be thinking about, can we really adopt and absorb and support this thing? As Vanita said, it takes some good skills. It takes a good team. It takes the right mix of people. It's something that has to be managed. There's no doubt about it, and you have to have the right skills and resources.
So if you just thought it was something where you just went out and picked a vendor and picked a technology, we're just telling you it's not. I think that's what we're trying to say.
Yep. So Katie, let's shift to the next slide here on some
Oh yeah, and this is about the examples we were talking about, right?
Yeah,
So
clients that have been through all these scenarios. So let's talk a little bit about them, Vanita. Go ahead and get started.
And we'll take turns, okay, Keith? Because I think both of us have enough stories to go through for almost 45 minutes on themselves. But I'm going to share a story of a financial company, so it was regulated. They had no automation, but they did have some pretty well thought through permissions to roles, mappings done. It was all done manually with spreadsheets, but they did have some of that. They recognized about a couple of years ago that they needed to look at automation, largely because they were growing and they were acquiring other financial organizations, and they needed to think this through, right? What they had. Because when everybody knew everybody and it was all tribal, it worked very well. So we sat down with them before they picked the technology and walked through all of the questions that we talked about. At that time, identity governance solutions weren't very mature. And yet they were, because you could see that they had done the homework, they had these spreadsheets, they had these fairly complex roles, etc. They wanted provisioning to be automated. So we said, okay, so now we need a technology that not only gives you identity governance, but also automates your provisioning. We figured out by looking at their requirements, services, processes, that an IDaaS solution wouldn't work for them. Plus, they wanted to be able to tweak their policies and figure things out before they put something into the cloud. So, we sat down, we picked a technology, and we rolled it out. And I am proud to say that it worked really well. They do have a very good perception of this product now, and their management is very happy with the results. We are still there because what their weakness is support. They don't have skilled support staff. So we have a sort of arrangement where they call us when something breaks or when they need upgrades. But overall, it's a solution that works for them and a technology that works for them. So we like to think that collaboratively, we picked the right solution for them. Yep. And it was greenfield, so we had a lot of choices because, they were all manual. So anything we did, it was going to look good. But the question was, what was going to stay looking good 2 years down the road? And that was what was really important.
Right. And the example I'll talk about, Vanita, on a regulated is a energy utility. I mean, they're part of critical infrastructure, so you can't. There's limits on what you can do, right? That has to be safeguarded very carefully. So going in, we've been working with this company for well over 10 years, over 15 actually. They had a good, strong foundation of technologies and processes, and were very effective using it. And but interested in modernizing, realizing some better efficiency, some capabilities that were newer in some of these newer products. But when you're that type of industry, that type of organization, you're going to have limits on what you can do when it comes to IDaaS versus on-prem. So automatically, they know they've got to put something in place that's on premise. But then the questions start becoming, okay, what are the key capabilities we need to look at that we're not already satisfying with what we have today? And it became an investigation into what do we really need to improve, where are our gaps, and that's where the assessment helps. Where are we today? Where do we need to go, and where are those gaps, and what type of technology can solve that problem for us? And so that's what they started looking at was, where's our gaps? What are the key things we need to improve on? And let's focus there when we pick a tool. And it wasn't really a on-prem versus cloud equation for them. It just couldn't be.
Well, we've had, some interesting stories around modernizing. So I'm going to pick that one because really it's been an interesting journey for us. We have a client, and they are still a client, and we're doing managed services for them. In their case, they recognized that they were really focused on the services they provided their clients. And those services did not include identity and access management. They had a website with a database and they collected client information and then they worked around. And they knew they needed to modernize that solution, make it more seamless for their clients. And at the same time, they did not want to get into the whole thing of supporting such a solution. Now, they had a couple of options. They could have gone with an IDaaS solution. But what we did discover was that their parent company actually had licenses for a really mature access management solution. So what we came back with to them was that we would use those licenses, so that way there was a reduced license cost from their perspective. We would build that solution in the cloud for them, host it, and manage it for them. And that has worked out really well because what's happened is they've actually moved from where they had the website with the database. They've got a really mature access management solution that provides SSO to their clients. So their clients are really happy. They didn't have to build up their IAM staff because we take care of the solution. And it really is a win-win solution, right? Because from their perspective, they ask us for a service, we turn around and provide it to them. They add applications, they are going more and more into the cloud, and all of that is taken care of. So from a managed service perspective, they're happy.
Yep.
And from our perspective, it's really we have control. So we know that when things break, it's within our control to fix it quickly. So it kind of works really well for us.
Yeah, that's a really good option. And we have a similar story with one of our clients. In fact, we did a webinar with this gentleman a couple sessions ago, so feel free to go back and look at the one around cloud IAM. But when you're talking about wanting something that's more IDaaS or get the burden off of us, we don't want to deal with the infrastructure, the support, etc. Most companies would think, well, we need to pick up a new product and deal with it that way. And we walked through that exercise with this client. But the requirements that they had were just not going to fit what was available in the market at the time. I mean, they could get it there eventually, but it was going to take a lot of customization, a lot of heavy lifting, and a lot of complexity, and they just didn't have the appetite for it at the time. So what we did instead was, so that they could kind of check the box on moving to the cloud, we just took their current solution and we just did a lift and a shift. We did an upgrade on the way, but we took their product, put it in the cloud for them. Again, we're providing managed service similar to Benita's company. And so we took the burden off of them for infrastructure support. It improved their SLAs significantly. Now they can, follow their cloud first strategy essentially, and they didn't require new licensing costs as well. So it was a very good, we'll call it an interim step to the cloud. I think eventually they will move to a technology that's more IDaaS based to support them, or maybe something more modern that's, using the same hosted model. But it was a very quick, in relative terms, a very quick win for them, and it checked the box of, hey, we need to get this infrastructure support requirement off of our back and get it to the cloud or some other, put the burden on someone else. So it's in our lane. We're good at that. It was easy for us to do essentially, and it really helped our client and improve their service levels. So it was a great win for them. So Katie, let's scoot along. We're running along here, but let's talk about takeaways, Benita.
Yeah, this is something we will provide to you. So I hope this is useful. We tried to summarize everything we could. We've talked about into 5 main takeaways as you pick a technology. And Keith? You want to go first?
Well, sure. I mean, you started with this, right? Your new perimeter is your identities. It's never been more clear with the work from home as a result of COVID. I think a lot more of that is here to stay than people will admit. There's companies that definitely want to try to get back to the office, but it's never going to go back to the way it was. There's just a paradigm shift now. For
And
what
I think the important thing is, for these companies and for those that are, looking for new technologies for whatever reason, you've got to have a technology that meets your requirements.
Yep.
Please, please, please do not just say, the analyst told me to use this. Look at your own capabilities, look at your priorities, and pick your technology that works for you. I can't emphasize this anymore because we are struggling with customers who picked a technology just because everyone else did, and then trying to make it work in their environment is challenging.
Yeah, don't do it backwards. And then just remember, technology is just a technology. It's not going to work if you don't do the hard work of mapping what you need as an organization into the way the tools work, or vice versa. One way or the other, you've got to make sure that your business stakeholders are supported, that their processes can work here, that your policies can be enforced using these technologies. And you need to kind of know that before you get into it, or you're gonna paint yourself into a corner. So technology is just technology. You still have to do the work around it.
And also, you've got to figure out, if you have a cloud strategy where you're moving your applications into the cloud, but some are still on-prem, you've got to have a technology that allows you to support that hybrid environment. Make sure that you figure out how you're going to support the transition, how your security is going to stay consistent. And even if you are moving into a sort of an IDaaS environment, transitioning is important. You don't want to just leave security by the wayside just because you're going to be doing this sooner than later. So
Yep.
please make sure your solutions can support hybrid environments.
Yeah, and then just another point, when you're picking these technologies, don't feel like once we pick one, we're sunk for 10 years. I think these newer technologies are going to be much easier to move around with, to integrate with, to fit different best of breed products more often, more frequently. We've always had the mentality as a company that you don't really want to try to, you know, rewire things outside of the way the products are built to do it. And a lot of that direction advice can come from a good integrator, but you don't want to just take a product and turn it upside down and customize the heck out of it and then expect to be able to be agile with these tools. So you need to make sure you're watching for technology changes. There's a lot of things that are coming along that can help you with evolution of these technologies becoming more secure, more scalable, more agile. I do see a question related to this that we'll address, but don't feel like it's a once and done. I think companies are going to be moving around with technologies much more frequently than we have in the past.
And we're going to be looking for single pane views, right? Because when you have all these disparate solutions, I think that was where the question was going. You've got all these technologies because there isn't a one size fits across the globe. You've got all your different data protection laws, etc. If you have different technologies, we have mechanisms to give you that single pane view. And, I'd love to talk to you about it. That would be a session in itself. But it's definitely something that can be done, and there are ways around it. And you model that centralized visibility is what you've asked about, and absolutely that can be done.
So, Katie, I know we're getting close to time here. Why don't we go ahead and move into the rest of the program here?
Excellent. Well, thank you for the panel discussion. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. We had over 70% of attendees respond. I'm heading to share the results, and those that are watching a recording won't be able to see the results, but I'd love it if you two panelists would take a moment to look through the results and comment on any trends that you see before we move over to question and answer.
Well, the first question was about strategic initiatives, and it looks like a lot of companies have, stepped up their game. It's showing 60% have been focused on long term, which is excellent. hopefully they can get from focusing on it to implementing it. But there's still room for companies to improve. But it does look like the majority are focused on strategic initiatives, which is great. Looks like there's a lot of companies doing assessments as well. Some are at least identifying their gaps, but a lot of companies have done an assessment within the last year, which is an excellent place to start. As I mentioned, you got to know what your baseline is so you know where to improve from.
And I see a question around the using RFPs to select IAM products. Keith, do you want to take that one? Because I know you love that subject.
Yeah, well, and even the poll we asked that, do y'all use RFP processes, which some companies are just required to do. There's no way around it. But I do think you can limit your options before going into an RFP by doing some things before that, which is just get your hands on the products and make sure that you can see and feel in touch what they do, and not just product vendors, but integrators. Talk to the people that are helping implement these things, about their experiences. Talk to customers that are using these things. But I would say, do a good job of vetting solutions with your actual requirements and use cases. Get a look at them and see how they look and feel to you, and maybe just take a couple of those and really run them through their paces. And then maybe do RFP work to just tighten the pricing. But we get RFPs all the time with just asking us to blindly respond to 500 questions, and it's really hard to tailor a response when you're not able to really interact and work with clients who are asking for that information. So I think
it's more than that. It's more than that. I think the other problem is when you do these sorts of RFPs, think about your own prioritization. If you ask for a solution that solves world hunger, and somebody actually tells you their solution does, you need to be really worried. I think you need to tailor the questions. And we've had some RFPs that have actually worked, and we actually helped the companies put those together. And what we did was we sat down, did the capabilities and requirements up front, identified the ones that were really important, put those in the RFP, and said, here are some other nice to haves, but please tell us that which of these top 20 or 30 or whatever it is you do, so that it's not 500 questions that are meaningless because you're not going to do anything like that. You don't even have the environment to do something like that. And yet you've asked the question because, it was just out there. And so you threw it out there. You picked up a sort of a ready-made checklist for governance products and put everything you could think of in there. So that's very important. You can make RFPs work. You just have to make sure they make sense for your organization.
Right. And there's another topic in the poll about looking at analyst recommendations, which, and it's pretty clear. 8 out of 10 people are looking at what the analysts say, which is good to start with and to educate around. But I'm telling you, as an integrator, we've seen input and feedback and comments from those analysts about certain products that are just flat wrong. So you can't trust it completely. You do have to make sure that you do your own vetting and check what they're saying with clients, with integrators, with people who are out in the field doing that work day in, day out. So,
and again, it may not be that the analysts are saying something wrong. It may be that your requirements are slightly different to what the analysts used when using that, doing that measurement.
yeah,
so it's important to take their opinion, but always look at it with your own filter of what you need. That's, I think, my biggest takeaway to everybody who's on this session is please look at your environment, understand your culture and your business needs, as opposed to looking for something where one size fits all.
Yep. And Katie, I know we have a few questions. Do you want to highlight those for us?
Yes, we've got some great ones. Let's see how many we can get through. We've got 3 minutes left. So first question, what about contracting or other legal concerns around hosting of data outside the U.S. or support resources with access to data from outside U.S. for IDaaS solutions?
Anita, you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So if your organization has any restrictions around that, that is a very important thing to put on the table when you make your product selection. It is important. And what we did is, we did some work for a multinational organization that you probably all know. It does everything from tissues to diapers to everything. And one of the big issues was they had all these data restrictions around where the data was stored. And we had to go to the IDaaS vendors and talk this through. And it's important to do that and make them understand that if the consumer came, for example, from Russia or China or Germany, wherever the regulations are, we needed to make sure that that data was stored correctly and in alignment with GDPR or whatever it was. So you've got to put that in there as a very critical requirement as you make those decisions. It's really important. It's not something to just sweep under the mat and then hope that you can resolve it later down the road.
Thanks, Vanita. Next question, identity and cybersecurity have converged. What are 3 considerations that cyber and machine learning-based user behavior analytics play when selecting an identity and access management solution?
Yeah, and I'll speak this a little bit, Vanita, but yeah, it's a blurred industry now for sure. Now, when it comes to machine learning and AI, there are some up and coming technologies that may be able to improve. We've always advocated for integrating SIM tools with what's going on in your IAM space, feeding that data over. Some of the real time from access management can really be useful, but even the activities around what's happening with policies, or what's really happening versus what's happening, what your policy should say, all that data can lead to better decisions and information about user behavior. I will say that machine learning and AI and things like that are evolving right now. They're pretty expensive propositions, and I think they've still got a little ways to go, but it's an advanced feature. There's so much basic blocking and tackling that so many companies still have to do right now that those advanced features, may need to wait for your other priorities before you get there.
Okay. We are out of time. We did not get to all the questions, so I'm going to make a commitment that if you ask a question, somebody will get back to you with an answer. The next session in our series on building an identity and access management roadmap will be June 17th. We will cover the importance of planning before you build. It was a pleasure having you join us for this panel discussion on the importance of picking the right solution and technology. And we look forward to having you join us again on June 17th at the same time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.